Seconds.
Still people joining, so letting them in.
Yeah.
Michelle, just let me know when we're ready.
Okay, we're live now.
We're live now.
Yeah, we're ready to
Well,
start.
great. Ready to start. Welcome back, everyone, to day 2 of the CAG meeting. And today we're going to cover audit evidence. We're going to cover EER, and we're going to talk about the work plan as well as have our private enclosed session. The sessions will be on YouTube and available for the public. So I think I will kick it off. We had a really good discussion yesterday, and I will kick it off by handing it off to Sue Amon, who will talk about audit evidence. Sue, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks very much, Jim, and hello everybody. So the purpose of the session today is really just an update from the discussion that you had in September. We weren't due to come formally back to this group, but because this is one of the priority projects, clearly an update is in order. There aren't any specific questions as this is an update session. If we can go to the next slide, please, Misha. So the discussion that you had in September was primarily around the project proposal, which was considered by the IAASB at the December meeting. That project proposal was a bit updated from what you saw. It took account of some of the feedback from this group, specifically in the pieces around the use of persuasiveness, and also taking account of the comments around weighing up quality versus quantity of evidence, and that more of the same is not necessarily a good thing. So the board approved the project proposal in December, and that is available for you. There's also been a feedback document to you on the way in which the comments from the September meeting were addressed. If we can move to the next slide, please. Perhaps just a reminder of the key reasons why we're doing this and the elements that are in the project proposal. The public interest issues that we're addressing in this project are around changes in the information that auditors use, particularly the range of external information that is now available to be used and deployed in an audit context. To look at modernising the standard, it's been in place for quite some time, and specifically to address the use of technology both by the reporting entity and the auditors, and also to build in more in the way of professional skepticism. On the what we're aiming to achieve, the scope of this project is quite important, because it's audit evidence is pervasive through an awful lot of the standards. So the project proposal is quite clear about the purpose of the exercise. So to clarify the purpose of the standard, its relationship to other ISAs, particularly those that have been updated recently. To clarify the auditor responsibility around information used as audit evidence. To adopt a principles-based approach that is suitable for all the sources of information that we have. To recognise the use of technology, which I've already referenced, but noting that it's not about being prescriptive about the use of technology, but instead looking at how the use of technology can impact the audit evidence available. Clarifying around sufficient appropriate audit evidence, and emphasising professional skepticism. So those are the areas that are covered in the project proposal that has been approved and is now going forward. Next slide, please. The project timeline, I think, did change from what you saw in September. So that's now in a position where we are working towards the approval of an exposure draft in March 2022 and a final standard for approval in June 2023. So I think that was previously March 2023 at your last meeting. Next slide, please, Michelle. As well as looking at the project proposal in December 2020, the IAASB took some time to look at a number of the key issues that are embedded in the standard and to get some initial direction around some of the areas that we have on the slide here. Firstly, around the purpose and the scope of the standard, there was feedback there that there's a need to clarify some of the purpose and building in more in the way of application material and linking specifically to some of the other standards, in particular 220 and 315 that have been updated since this was since 500 was originally issued. We also looked at the concept and evaluation of sufficient appropriate audit evidence, including the point on persuasiveness of audit evidence, and the board was supportive of incorporating the concept of persuasiveness, but also steered against trying to build in more in the way of definitions in that area. The other area we looked at was around information to be used as audit evidence, with considerations of the factors and the attributes of the information to be considered in looking at information to be used as audit evidence. And that reflects the range of information that there is available. The first bullet point there is important because the board agreed on the focus on a principles-based approach in considering the relevance and reliability of audit information to be used as audit evidence. And that was irrespective of the source. At the moment, the standard references information produced by the entity, but that distinction between what's produced by the entity or what other information is available is becoming more blurred in the technology environment. So the principles-based approach is important. The task force believes that this will actually end up with a more robust standard because those principles will apply to all evidence to be used as audit evidence, sorry, all information to be used as audit evidence, irrespective of the source. So that was an important point. The sources of information, I've referenced the distinction between whether it's produced by the entity or elsewhere is not going to be as visible in the requirement. And the consideration of the varying degree of the work effort in considering audit evidence. So discussion of the fact that certain factors may be more relevant to certain types of information. So that was those were the key areas that we looked at in the December meeting. We have the first slot on the meeting next week in March. So if we can have the next slide, please, Michelle. The areas that we're considering for the March meeting. The paper for March is quite a technical paper. And the reason that that's important is that some of these principles then flow on into areas such as the work effort that's needed, whether the individual doing it is a member of the audit team, what the documentation is, and so on. So there are a number of areas that will be quite detailed, quite technical to work through before we then get into the next stage of the standard. So the first one is around clarifying the definition of audit evidence, and the kinds of issues that we're exploring are taking the information that's available, does information need to be subjected to some audit procedures in order to become audit evidence? If that's the case, what's the meaning of audit procedures? So what has to be done to convert general information into audit evidence, and really considering whether the evidence is the input into the procedures, so the information that goes into the audit consideration, or the output of those procedures. And the task force has recommended that it's the output, and so we will look for the feedback on that basis. The next area is around looking at the relevance and reliability of information and evaluating whether it's sufficiently relevant and reliable for the audit purposes. As I said before, this is where we believe that the requirement, although shorter, will probably be more robust, because it's the proposal there is a more principles-based requirement that applies to all information. And then enhanced application material that looks at the attributes of relevance and reliability, considers the factors to which those attributes apply, the degree to which they might apply, the extent of work that might be necessary when considering those, with a lot of examples. And you've probably seen in the supporting papers, there are a number of examples there. We've also worked quite hard in the formatting of this to try and move away from or try and address the concerns that have been expressed around whether these factors appear like some kind of checklist, whether people would expect that all of them need to be looked at in each situation, which it's clear is not the case. So those are two of the main areas. Michelle, if I can have the next slide, please. The other areas that we have on the agenda are around looking at sufficient appropriate audit evidence. We've spent a lot of time working on the definitions there and some proposals there around firstly looking at appropriate audit evidence, and then sufficiency of appropriate audit evidence. We've looked at categorizing the considerations into the three areas that you've got listed on the slide. So the assessed risks of material misstatement, the information that's used as audit evidence, and the effectiveness of the audit procedures, because those three areas together blend in the audit consideration as to whether there is sufficient appropriate evidence. If the audit procedures haven't been undertaken effectively, then that conclusion is not appropriate. So that analysis will be looking at the effectiveness. Also picks up a lot of the concerns around that are in 220 at the moment as well. So getting feedback on the definitions of sufficient appropriate audit evidence will be the key areas. And then the final bullet point there is quite a large area, which is around some of the modernisation pieces. And this is where we pick up the point around technology, looking at examples in the application material to demonstrate how the principles that we have in the principles-based standard apply when information's in digital form, whether the client uses technology, whether the auditor uses technology. So, as I said previously, the intention isn't that there's a requirement for technology to be used, but the application material explains how technology could be applied to achieve the objectives. We have a number of examples that have been built into the application material that we'll be looking for feedback on. We had a session recently with the technology working group, so we've had their input, which has been really helpful in shaping those examples. And the other point to consider with technology is that we are probably trying to tread a balance in that if the examples are too granular, there's a risk that they become outdated quite quickly. So we're trying to keep them at a level whereby they recognise that there is technology approaches that can be adopted, but we'll be working with the technology working group to be able to provide the more perhaps the more timely maybe more granular examples as technology evolves going forward. So an alternative means of providing feedback in that area as well. The one area that I'm conscious isn't on the slides and that we haven't covered in the discussions yet as a task force is professional skepticism. We have looked at that in a lot of the examples that we've been working on and endeavouring to build that in. But a next exercise will be to work with the professional skepticism group to make sure we get feedback and continue to build that in as far as possible. So Jim, that I think is the the headlines of what's happened since this group were updated in September. I'm happy to stop there and take any questions or feedback.
Okay, thank you, Sue. And I already see a hand up, so why don't we proceed to that? Robert, welcome today. You have a question? Robert DiTullio?
Okay, I think I was on mute. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes.
Can you hear? Okay, my apologies. Thanks for the presentation. I just was going to ask, so the AICPA Auditing Standards Board issued their SAS 142 on audit evidence, and addressing a number of the topics you mentioned, automated tools and techniques and professional skepticism. So I guess my question is, have you considered some of the guidance in there, and what are your impressions of that? Was it helpful or?
Yeah, thanks. And yes, we have. You're probably aware. I mean, my predecessor as chair, Bob Dora, clearly was very involved in the AICPA project. We have 2 members of the task force who were also involved in that. We have looked at the material there, and you will see in some of the examples of some of the application material there's some material that has been very helpful there. That said, there are also areas where we've taken a slightly different approach as we've been working through some of the material, conscious of different environments that people work in. And actually, one of the pieces of feedback we had from one of the task force members was really powerful around translation and some of the phrases, and being very cautious about the terminology we use. But yes, absolutely, we are. We have looked very hard at the material from the AICPA.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Let's see if I have any other hands. I see Takashi.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Ren. Thank you, Sue, the presentation, the update from the last CAG meeting. I have a comment from high level. When I heard your update, I really recognize the importance, the coordination of the other working group. Already you mentioned the technology working group and professional skepticism working group. And also I think it is important to coordination with the LC working group. And in addition to that, I am supportive for the task force direction, especially the principle-based approach in considering the relevance and reliability of the information to use that as audit evidence. It is very important because I think it is also important the consideration should be given to the balance of the cost when the auditor will implement it the new revised ISO 500. So implementation of the revised ISO 500 or audit evidence does not incur significant cost, undue cost due to excessive additional audit procedure. So in that sense, I want to emphasize the principle-based approach is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Takashi. Wei.
Hello, thanks, Jim. Thanks the update of the work of the Audit Evidence Task Force. The task force has done a good job in identifying some of the key issues. Generally, I support the directions taken by the task force, especially recognizing the use of technology and the impact of the technology on audit procedures to assess the audit evidence. I also encourage the task force to cooperate with the fraud working group on the audit procedures to assess audit evidence that may have fraud risks. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Wei. Shigeo.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation on this important and timely project. I recognize that there's an urgency in making progress in this area at this juncture, but at the same time, I also note that it may take some time to make significant progress because of the need to coordinate closely with other projects, especially technology area. Nevertheless, I am a bit concerned that the final standard is planned to be approved in June 2023, which is more than 2 years from now. And I wonder whether it will be able to remain timely and relevant at that time. So I wonder whether 2 years will be needed because of constraints in human and financial resources, or for the coordination with other projects. But overall, I am happy to support the work of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Shigeo. Hussein.
Thank you very much for presentation. My comment is about documentation of audit evidence. As from regulator, for our oversight, for our inspection or investigation activities, audit evidence is crucial. Therefore, during the project, I think this area, documentation of audit, needs some special concern, especially during our regulatory activities, inspection or investigation. We confront with different cases, and whenever ask auditor, what did you do about these issues? Just mention about some activities, but couldn't document it. Therefore, I think this issue should be carefully considered during this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Hussein. Danielle.
Can you hear me? Excuse me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I have a question of whether audit evidence is an input or an output for audit procedures. Very interesting question. I believe that insofar as evidence must be subjected to procedures, it is an input, but at the same time, it is an output when it responds to the expected result by applying audit procedures. Anyways, I think it's a very interesting research field in this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Galen.
Yeah, thank you, and for the excellent update. Appreciate that. Just kind of a follow-up to some of the earlier comments. I think the one that was just made, the relationship between audit evidence and audit procedures. I do agree with the task force's conclusion, or apparently the way forward is looking at it as an output, audit evidence as an output of the audit procedures. I think that's something that has been missing in the literature for some time, or at least has not been clarified. And I think it'd be good if that was clarified. I guess I do have a little bit of a concern about this distinction between internal and external evidence. I mean, it's been a basic principle for a lot of years And I would hate to see that go away entirely. Sue, I'd be sort of interested in your thoughts on that, and you know what the driver is there. I understand technology plays into it, and it does maybe blur that distinction, but is it going to go away entirely or not?
I think the distinction isn't necessarily going away, but it's probably moving away from the requirement. At the moment, the requirement is more onerous on internal than external. So by removing that distinction and thinking about what the information is for, what the purpose is for, then in the application material, we've probably referenced that more, and then the consideration of internal, external is potentially more relevant. I think what we're also seeing in some of the feedback is that the distinction between internal and external is quite blurred. If you've had some information that has come from outside the entity, some kind of process has happened within the entity. Are you dealing with something that's internal or external? So it kind of it becomes quite grey, quite a hard distinction to deal with if we're then making a requirement for specific procedures in one case but not in the other. So I take the caution, Galen, and I hope that you'll see more of a discussion in the application material recognising that.
Sue, one of the points that you mentioned, and I think it was the first or second slide, had to do with additional application guidance. And I was just reflecting on some of the feedback from the CAG in the past, really related to the volume of standards and sort of application guidance may be helpful on the one hand, on the other hand, it increases volume. And so I think there is some sensitivity on the part of the CAG on that. It looks like I have one more question, and then we can, if there's any other additional comments you'd like to make, Sue, that would be great. Billy, you have an additional point?
Yes, thank you, Jim. I just wanted to come in on the comment around the timeline. So clearly, I think there's always a ask, can we do things faster and quicker? And I mean, if at all possible, we always look at that. When we looked at the timeline for this project and when we took it to the board in December as well, we were very conscious of the environment we're in at the moment, as well as the staggering of some of these priority projects, also taking into account the ones that have just been completed in terms of 315 revised, the QM standards, ED 600, ISA 600 that we plan to complete, and all those standards also have to be absorbed into the market. So those were all things that played into the decision. And we also did a very good exercise in terms of how projects, based on past experience, are naturally progressing in terms of available staff capacity and board capacity. So we think the timelines are fine in terms of from project proposal, the time period from project proposal to exposure draft, and then also allowing the appropriate amount of time from exposure to finalization. But we take the point, we'll keep an eye on that, but we were fairly comfortable that we did consider all the relevant factors at that particular point in time.
Thank you, Billy.
Sorry, Jim, while I've got the floor, I can't resist to just come in on Galen's point as well around the distinction between internal and external information. And Sue is quite right, that distinction is not disappearing. But what we want to do is we want to say, whenever you deal with any information that you believe are going to become audit evidence, you need to consider the relevance and reliability of that information. And whether the information is internal or external may have an impact that in terms of how those attributes manifest, but you will still consider those attributes. It's just maybe whether it's internal or external will affect the way those attributes manifest. And like Sue has indicated, we hope to draw that out in the application material together with the requirement.
Thank you, Billy. Sue, I think that exhausts all the comments that we have. If you want to summarize any and share any
Thanks.
final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the feedback. Very grateful for the support that that a number of you have expressed. That's very encouraging as we go to the meeting next week. I think several of you referenced interaction with the various working groups, and my apologies because I had forgotten the fraud one in the presentation. So we will make sure we are working with all the groups there. I just wanted to come back on the comment about documentation from Hussein. The documentation requirements in ISA 230 are still still very much in place. So I think the scope of this project is really limited to any kind of conforming or consequential amendments. So I don't anticipate there will be significant changes there, but certainly we'll keep that point in mind. And then Jim, your final point about the careful tightrope act about volume, particularly given that we are asked for more, and particularly in the technology area, there is quite a demand for additional material, but we will be conscious of trying to keep things concise and useful.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with this group.
Thank you very much for speaking to us, and I think that we gave you some good feedback. So thanks, Sue.
Thank you.
All right. Well, next on our agenda is EER, and Lynn Provost will be presenting EER. So Lynn, I understand you're at a very reasonable hour in New Zealand for a change.
I am, which is delightful. Thank you all very much.
We're happy that it's not super late or super early. So
thanks very much. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. Michelle, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. It's been a while since we reported back to CAG. In fact, the last update was in March 2020, just after the consultation paper on the combined phase 1 and phase 2 guidance was issued, and around the time when we all went into lockdown. So we've got a year's worth of update to cover today, and I'm pleased to report that despite the challenges we've all faced with lockdown and virtual meetings, the progress on the EER project has been very good. Today, I plan to cover at a fairly high level a quick progress update, what we heard from the March 2020 consultation on the combined phases 1 and 2 of the EER guidance, and a little bit more detail on what the task force has done to progress the guidance further in response to that feedback. And finally, to go through the next steps for approval and publication of the EER non-authoritative guidance. Next slide, please. First, on this slide, I've put up a quick reminder of what we aim to do on this project, namely, in terms of 3000, we wanted to get consistent and high quality application, so that first of all, we influenced the EER assurance on the quality of EER reporting. Secondly, we enhanced trust in assurance reports. And thirdly, we engendered greater user confidence and trust in the reliability of EER reports. This year, we have seen quite a few rapid developments in EER reporting. Just as a sample of what's been happening, the statement of intent to work together towards comprehensive corporate reporting has been signed by 5 of the major framework and standard setters. Secondly, there's a call for an international sustainability standards board. And thirdly, there are regulatory developments, including the mandating of TCFD, climate-related financial disclosures, in several jurisdictions, and there is a lively current debate in Europe on non-financial reporting, all significant and big developments. So given the pace at which EER reporting is evolving, this guidance is more important than ever, and we know that practitioners and others are calling for it with some urgency. So let's turn now to the progress we've made since we last spoke. Next slide, please, Michelle. Thank you. So the consultation process was our first step, and after that, the task force met to analyse the responses and develop proposals to address that feedback. At the September IAASB meeting, we fed back the responses on the combined phase 1 and 2 guidance, together with our proposals to address the feedback. The board then met to consider what we were going to do, and we determined that on chapters 2 and 12, which are the ones that had the most significant changes, we should go back to the board before the December meeting and get feedback on those. In December, we presented updated near final guidance, and we included a proposed appendix on limited and reasonable assurance. And I'm going to come back to that in several points in the presentation. And over the last few months, since the December meeting, the task force has met to finalise the guidance and the non-authoritative support materials. I'll now move on to talk about those in some more detail. You'll remember that we asked the respondents to comment on the non-authoritative guidance document, answering questions chapter by chapter on both the structure and the content. We received 43 responses to the consultation paper, and the table on the right hand of the slide shows the spread of respondents, with most coming from member bodies and other professional organisations, accounting firms and national standards setters. Although there were fewer than the 52 respondents to phase 1 consultation, we had broadly the same mix of stakeholders responding to the second consultation as we did for phase 1. But the big difference with the March 2020 consultation responses was that they were significantly more positive than the phase 1 consultation, with a recognition that the task force had responded well to comments received on phase 1 of the project. Key themes coming out of the respondents' overall comments was, as I've already said, how quickly EER reporting is responding, and secondly, a recognition that historic financial information is no longer sufficient on its own to provide a holistic view of a company's performance and future viability. As I've already mentioned, just since the outset of this project, we've seen new areas of reporting emerging at pace, with investors, regulators, and other stakeholders calling for improved reporting, and in some cases, mandating reporting in this area, and recognising the importance of assurance in enhancing the credibility of what is reported. It's likely that pressure such as COVID-19, social unrest, and climate-related threats could all further accelerate this rate of change. Respondents also noted that it is crucially important that EER guidance be able to evolve to keep pace with the developments and innovations in EER reporting, and the project is of critical importance to the credibility of the global corporate reporting system. Respondents also commented overall on the improved structure of the guidance, and in particular, and this was a very strong view, the usefulness of the practical examples. No respondents expressed fundamental disagreement with the guidance, with most comments being helpful suggestions for further enhancement. Those comments included that there was a need for reordering some of the chapters to enhance the flow of the guidance, and there was need for enhanced guidance on evaluation as opposed to measurement techniques when obtaining evidence in relation to qualitative and future-orientated information. Over a third of the respondents called for further guidance and practical examples on applying differential requirements for limited and reasonable assurance, as in practice, the difference between limited and reasonable assurance is often misunderstood. A majority of the respondents who commented on the examples noted how useful they were, with a number asking for further practical examples in place of lengthy discussion to illustrate the application of the concepts and to illustrate the application of specific frameworks. In particular, respondents thought it would be useful to have practical examples on information of an integrated financial and non-financial nature, or of an integrated historic and future orientated nature, or a combination of these. So let's look at what we've done to address this feedback. Next slide, please, Michelle. First, on the structure and style of the guidance. In order to address respondents' comments, we repositioned some of the chapters. The previous chapter 6 on the entity's process to identify reporting topics was moved after chapter 3. This updated placement is helpful in reinforcing the preparer's role in preparing for assurance. And previous chapter 10 on reporting is now positioned at the end of the guidance as chapter 12, because reporting is the last stage in an insurance engagement. We also streamlined the guidance wherever possible by simplifying the language, focusing on EER specifics, reducing repetition in the standard, and replacing theoretical discussion with short practical examples in almost all of the chapters. In finalising the guidance, we are also looking to hyperlink from the guidance to the standard and between the chapters and specific paragraphs to aid navigation and use of the guidance. Next slide, please. The two big changes, as I've already said, were to chapters 2 and 12. After the IAASB September 2020 meeting, the task force held a series of teleconferences to discuss and agree detailed proposals for enhancing the guidance to respond to the feedback. We started with chapters 2 and 12, 2 and 10, which became chapter 12. These chapters, as I've already said, had the most change, and we wanted to get early feedback from the board on the direction we were taking. So in October, we asked for written feedback from the board on these 2 chapters. The board was largely supportive of the enhancements we'd made, with some suggestions for further improvement, which we took into account before the December meeting. The changes to these chapters are up on the slide, but just to briefly go through them, we separated the diagram in the professional skepticism and professional judgment chapter. We now have one for the factors that may increase the need for or present possible impediments to the exercise of professional judgment, and the second for behaviours and skills that may support the exercise of professional judgment. We also replaced a large amount of the theoretical discussion with practical EER specific examples. In chapter 12 on reporting, we replaced much of the text with 2 illustrative assurance reports, one for limited assurance and one for reasonable assurance. These illustrative reports have been annotated to show the basic elements required by the standard, as well as additional elements that the practitioner may find helpful to include. There was strong support from board members for the illustrative reports, as they provide a much simpler way for users of the guidance to visualise the various elements of the assurance report. Next slide, please. As I have mentioned several times, a key theme for the feedback in March was the need for practical guidance on the different requirements for limited and reasonable assurance. Although this was not one of the 10 challenges identified at the start of the project, the task force and board recognised the challenge faced by practitioners, knowing effectively how much is enough. We therefore propose including a table as an appendix to the guidance to illustrate the difference between limited and reasonable assurance. An initial draft of the table was presented to the board in September. Both the board and our EER project advisory panel members were generally supportive of the concept and of the illustrative procedures, but were of the view that for limited assurance, it's important to illustrate the range of limited assurance and to avoid suggesting that there are particular points for lower and upper end of the range for limited assurance. We have therefore updated the appendix accordingly to show incremental illustrative procedures from just above clearly inconsequential to just below reasonable assurance. Additionally, it has been clarified that the procedures performed for limited assurance may lie anywhere along the continuum, and there is no fixed point for low, medium, and high range. The procedures can also vary from different aspects of subject matter information, depending on risk considerations, and the nature, timing, and extent of procedures is a matter of professional judgment in the engagement circumstances. The procedures on that appendix are illustrative only, because we can never illustrate all potential and possible approaches. So they are not intended to suggest the only approach to each level of assurance or to suggest best practice. This is made clear in the appendix. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'm not going to go through the detail of the changes on a chapter by chapter basis, as all the chapters except for 2 and 12 had fewer changes, but I will focus on a few key changes. First, the diagrams. When respondents to the consultation commented on the use of diagrams, comments were generally positive, with some suggestions for a further enhancement of the diagrams. However, on one particular diagram, diagram 5, known as either the jellyfish or the umbrella, which was intended to illustrate the interrelationship between the preconditions, was considered to be far too complex. They suggested that either the diagram should be simplified or deleted. The task force has taken the former approach and has produced a simpler flow type diagram in chapter 3. The diagram in chapter 9 on the materiality of misstatements has also been replaced to better show the practitioner's responsibility in relation to identified misstatements. We have made some minor enhancements to other diagrams as well. To address the call and the guidance for further practical examples, we've included a number of short practical examples in each chapter, and that is to make the guidance more practical than conceptual. And finally, as I've mentioned earlier, respondents commented that there was a need for enhanced guidance on evaluation as opposed to measurement when obtaining evidence on qualitative and future-orientated information. They also noted how useful the examples were and called for more examples to illustrate these concepts and the use of different frameworks. To address this feedback, the task force has enhanced the guidance in chapters 10 and 11 on qualitative and future-orientated organisation information. And that brings me nicely to the 2 supplements to the guidance and what we have done here. Next slide, please. You may recall that the March 2020 consultation document also invited respondents to comment on 2 supplementary documents, should they wish to. Supplement A, Credibility and Trust Model, Part 1, and Background and Conceptual Information, Part 2, and Supplement B, Illustrative Examples. They were the longer illustrative examples as opposed to the short ones in the guidance. In summary, we only got a few respondents providing comments on the supplements. We heard very strong support for Supplement A, with several respondents noting that the examples were the most useful aspect of the guidance and calling for further practical examples. There was mixed support for Supplement A, although Part 1 was more clearly supported than Part 2. With input from the board meetings in September and December, the task force progressed work on the supplements alongside the guidance. This included developing 5 new comprehensive examples for Supplement B to illustrate evaluation techniques and application of the different frameworks and retaining Part 1 of Supplement A. those changes, those new examples are up on the slide in front of you. We have also renamed the supplements. Thank you very much, Philly. So the first one is called Non-Authoritative Support Material, Illustrative Examples of Selected Aspects of EER Assurance Engagements. And the second one, Non-Authoritative Support Material, Credibility and Trust Model relating to EER reporting. As highlighted in the explanatory memorandum to the public consultation, the two supplements are not integral to the guidance, but are intended as companion documents should practitioners wish to refer to them. The guidance can be used by practitioners without the need to refer to the supplements. So the guidance is intended to be used as a standalone resource. However, we do note how much positive feedback and how useful the people thought the long illustrative examples were. These supplements are not being presented to the March 2021 board meeting. They are subject to a different approval process, and that is underway at this point in time. Moving right on, Michelle. That brings me, Jim, to the end of the changes we've made and the points I wanted to highlight. If we can pause here for any discussion before I talk about next steps. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you for the presentation. And we already do have a few questions. And so Paul Thompson.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Lynn. I think at the outset of your presentation, you really put your finger on the pulse. This is an area of dramatic change right now, especially in the European Union. The guidance that you've got for us here is great. I have no specific comments in relation to it. I do hope that it gets safely through and practitioners can start to use it. But what I would just like to say is a more general statement that this is possibly more relevant perhaps for the next agenda item on the work plan. And that is that I think here there is at the moment, the pace of change is such that there is a risk of the IAASB being overtaken by events. Just yesterday, the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group issued a couple of reports setting out a roadmap for the development of non-financial reporting standards, what they've now called sustainability reporting standards for use by companies in the European Union. And we can anticipate a revision of a non-financial reporting directive early summer, which will likely mandate all public interest entities in the European Union to produce sustainability reports using standards developed by IFRAG, and to have these reports subject to assurance. And that assurance perhaps will be reasonable assurance. And what that all means is that from 2023 or so, I mean, I'm speculating a little bit here, I'm looking at my crystal ball, a lot of companies in the European Union are going to have to produce sustainability reports with assurance attached. So the implication, I think, for the IAASB is I think work needs to start right now developing a standard or standards on sustainability reporting. I think the EER acronym can sort of fall by the wayside. It served its purpose, but I think going forward, we're looking very much at sustainability reporting. So, you know, this is great document, but I think there's some in terms of next steps, the next steps are really for the board to getting its hands around the possibility of having to do some really serious heavy lifting in the sustainability reporting assurance space. And I think IFAC has already recognized that. It put out a paper, I think, just last week on assurance of integrated reporting. I think they kind of see its imminence. Yeah, so a very general statement, but I think it had to be said.
Jim,
Thank you, Paul.
could I respond to Paul's comment?
Yes, you may.
I absolutely agree with you, Paul. It would be very easy for us in the IAASB to say we've done this guidance, we can move on to something else, but very aware of the very dynamic nature of this area and the need for support out there. So we as a board are going to have to think about how we respond to that need on an ongoing basis. And given everything on our work plan, that is not in the slightest bit easy. One of the reasons that almost every example in the guidance and the non-authoritative support is based on reasonable assurance is we saw that train coming down the track. And despite a number of board members wanting us to have more on limited assurance, we said we need to future-proof this, and reasonable assurance is where this will be going. So I couldn't agree with you more, Paul, and those are just a couple of comments.
Thanks, Lynn. I do see Tom's raised his hand, and I had a feeling it's probably related to this topic. Tom?
So, Paul, all your points well taken, but I do remember that the EER is built off an existing standard on assurance. Now, we could have a discussion of whether that's sufficient, but the way we've seen it is certainly EER will make a significant contribution forward in this area. We're also very much of the mind that we're monitoring events that are happening at the reporting side and the requirements side from reporting, whether it's at the European Union level, at the IFRS level, or at the many other standard setters that are acting in this space. So we're committed to following that, seeing where we get some stability on that side, and then acting quickly where we find real gaps emerging. So again, the challenge that we'll have is within the context of our limited resources at current work program, all of which we have high public interest topics on, is when could we return to this topic? And more importantly is to what is the real need? And to some extent that has to be reflected what's going on the reporting side as well. So very much, we're not saying that it's a done deal after EER. We need to get that out in March. That will be a substantial contribution. Then we're going to be in the closely monitoring role and then ready to act when we see some stability on the reporting side.
Thank you, Tom. Hilda?
Yes, good morning. It's evening here, but it's morning or good afternoon for some of you. I would really like to echo what Paul said, also speaking from Europe. We indeed expect that there will be much more requirements in Europe on non-financial information reporting. We still call it like that. It might be sustainability reporting in the near future, and to have mandatory assurance. First, most probably limited assurance, and then with the aim to have reasonable assurance a few years thereafter. So the project that you will finalize very soon is a very, very important and very, very welcome first step. And this had to be taken to indeed, potentially, hopefully, as soon as possible, get to the next level. And what you will issue will be very important for, I would say, first-time assurance providers in this area. For those that have already done so, they might have a number of specific, more technical questions that might not be addressed. So the question for next steps will come up potentially quite soon. And as Paul indicated, we have an expectation that Europe, which is considering itself as a leader with their Green Deal and in this area, environmentally, climate related, but also socially, especially after the pandemic and responding to that, that there will be a willingness to have own European non-financial information reporting standards. But for assurance, there is for the moment no plan to go for European standards, and we really would like to keep it like that. What does that mean? That there is this call towards the IAASB to actually monitor what is going on, not only in Europe, but elsewhere. We expect that this might be a fast-moving area in other parts of the world as well, and to see how to respond to that, because it would be very, very beneficial for the profession to have a assurance standard, both addressing limited and reasonable assurance in this area, which is a real standard or a suite of standards depending on what is needed. And that's really something which we would like to plead for as well. And with all that, it sounds like this is not enough for now, but it is still a very, very useful step. So congratulations to where you have gotten. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilda. Kazuhiro.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the detailed and to the point presentation. First of all, I'd like to pay tribute to the IAASB staff and members who boldly tackled with a difficult problem such as ER assurance and came up with guidance in a short period of the time. In the presentation document, only one investor and analyst commented on the consultation paper, but as the importance of non-financial information has increased, I think investors and analysts have become more focused on the quality of non-financial information, and are also interested in the assurance, EER assurance. In the field of non-financial information, the Ifrs Foundation has started to work on it, and SSB and IIRC have announced integration. So the movement is rapid, and investors and analysts will be interested in it, including assurance. This guidance, for example, for qualitative information in Chapter 10, require preparers to avoid ambiguous expressions, and for information on future-oriented in Chapter 11, encourage preparers to disclose the assumption of such information. It is very helpful for users, and it is useful for preparers to be encouraged to reconsider their non-financial information disclosure in order to respond to needs of intended users. The movement in this area is fast, and we expect I expect the IAASB to agilely or timely review its standard and guidance as needed. I have one question and one request. I would like to ask is that in Chapter 4, not only investors but also various stakeholders are assumed as the intended users of EER. And it seems like that the description of impact in paragraph 154 to 156 agenda item G2 are similar to the perspective of so-called double materiality, but it seems that agenda G4 has less double materiality description than agenda G5. Are there any reason? And my request is guidance is also likely to be of great interest to non-English speaking financial statements preparers, users, and auditors. If possible, we would appreciate it if IAASB could cooperate with the accountant CPA organization in each country and proceed with the translation promptly. It would be very helpful to many stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Kazuhiro. Certainly the EER has been a source of lots of discussion over the last year or so. Paul?
Yeah, to a great extent, I want to echo much of what Paul Thompson said. You know, this is really important guidance, and I think it's coming along nicely. There was one thing I was a little confused about, and maybe it's just me. It's fairly minute. Back when you were talking about the comments from the consultation paper, the first comment for enhancement said the need for EER assurance to evolve at a similar pace. I wasn't sure similar pace to what, and whether that meant that the people thought that the guidance on how to perform an EER engagement was perhaps not advancing as quickly as reporting on an EER engagement. And I'm not sure whether, the focus on professional skepticism in Chapter 2 and then the reporting in Chapter 12 addresses that comment. Although I could also see that kind of everything you talked about maybe addresses that comment. So again, maybe my confusion, but just wanted to point it out.
Thank you, Paul. Henry.
Thank you, Jim. And thanks very much, Lynn, for the update. It's been very good to hear about the excellent progress that's been made on this very timely and important guidance. And I only just really wanted to echo what's been said about continuing the momentum that's been established with this, given it is such a rapidly evolving area. And it was good to hear Tom's comment about that as well. Maybe if I could just very briefly mention, developments in my organization, and I think Tom just did briefly indicate, and that is the IAASB's parent organization, the trustees of the Ifrs Foundation. They are moving apace really in their work for the Ifrs Foundation to play a part in global sustainability reporting. I'm sure many of you may have seen a consultation paper that they published last year on this. And in light of the feedback that they received to that, they are now working on establishing a sort of a new international sustainability reporting standards board. And the idea is that if this board came to fruition, it would sit alongside the IAASB within the foundation's existing structure, and with the aim of building on the sort of existing frameworks in the sustainability reporting space. So, we're entering into this sort of rapidly evolving area as well. So I just think, continuing the momentum that's been established with this guidance is going to be important to ensure that, it remains relevant as the reporting continues to develop apace in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Henry. Shigeo.
Okay, thank you, Jim, and thank you for the presentation on this very important issue and a very timely discussion. PIB welcomes and supports this project because providing assurance to extended external reporting is important for the credibility of such reporting, which is being increasingly used by various preparers. And I think this is in the public interest. I can support the revisions proposed, which adds clarity and tries to streamline the guidance. I particularly welcome the task force efforts, as explained in the presentation, to use quote unquote plain English and replace theoretical discussions with short practical examples. I think these improvements are expected to enhance the understandability and also increase the usability of the guidance. I'm happy to support the overall direction of the task force work, which is responsive to the public interest. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shigayo. And Vili?
Thank you, Jim. I just wanted to also come in terms of just the role of this guidance in the context of our current suite of ISAE standards. And I think the comments that we received today is been very helpful in just crystallizing my thinking, at least in terms of when the ER guidance is published. We need to also be very clear as the IAASB in terms of our messaging around this. Because I think the one thing that we do need to reconfirm to the profession out there is that, and not just the profession, more the other stakeholders and the users of ER reports, is that as we speak today, we have a standard. And that standard is a robust standard. And that standard can be used to issue limited assurance reports and reasonable assurance reports as it is today. Remember, the need that was identified when the ER project commenced is that because ISA 3000 revised was written as an umbrella standard for assurance engagements other than audits or reviews on historical financial information, a number of challenges were identified in terms of applying ISA 3000 in those circumstances. And this project aims to address those specific challenges and say, well, we've got a standard. We recognize that there are a number of challenges that we identified, and we can support the proper application of the standard that we have through developing this non-authoritative guidance. So I think that messaging needs to be very clear and linked to what Tom said earlier as well. We're obviously very conscious of the needs and the global relevance of our standards and the continuing relevance and operability of those standards. But it is important that there's a very important aspect around the reporting that is taking place at the moment. And as Henry has also indicated, if there's going to be a standard setting board parallel to what we see with IFRS and the International Accounting Standards Board, and we can have more stability around the criteria that is used when preparing sustainability reports, that makes it much easier for a standard setter like the IAASB to then develop a subject matter specific ISAE in a particular area. But in the interim, the umbrella standard is there. We can only proceed with setting subject matter specific standards if all the other pieces of the puzzle are in place, because otherwise we might be expending a lot of resources and effort on something which has not been indicated yet for us to go and do targeted standard setting in a specific area. But I think that messaging around the standard that is already there, it can be used, it can support reasonable and limited assurance is important, and then obviously supported then by the guidance that we hope will be voted out at the March meeting. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Vili. Okay, Lynn, and one other comment I have, and that is similar to some previous comments, and just understanding this is more guidance. It is a very long read, and there may be some continued areas to trim. But I will turn it back to you to respond to the many comments you received. Evidently, there's significant interest in this particular area. Lynn?
First of all, I'd like to thank you all for your comments. They were incredibly useful, and the word I heard most was pace. And couldn't agree more that the pace of change, the pace of implementation is definitely moving. And so I think, in my opinion, the timeliness of this guidance will sit nicely with people. This obviously can't be the end of the IAASB's interest in EER, but as both Billy and Tom have said, we have to be sensible and careful about where we go from here and what we do. And believe us, we have got it firmly in our heads. In terms of Paul's comment about a similar pace to EER reporting, what's been in our heads in terms of doing this project is to keep in touch with what's happening both at a standard setting and a practice level, and then making sure that our guidance kept at a similar pace to that. So as new frameworks, as new issues arose, we tried to build those in. So that's what I was meaning by that comment, Paul. Finally, we will have a look at Chapter 4, 154 to 156. On double materiality, however, we have decided that we cannot put it in the guidance. That was decided at the board meeting in December. And the reason for that is it's not actually in the standard. So we cannot expand the standard in terms of doing non-authoritative guidance. So that's the reason why we haven't addressed double materiality. But if I could, before I talk about the next steps, just once again, thank you very much. That has been very useful input, and we will feed it into the board meeting next week. Jim, is it okay if I go on with my final slide?
Yes, please do.
Okay, next week we are going to seek approval for this guidance, and we hope that it will be issued very shortly after that. We are very aware that it is long, and we were hoping that the digital handbook would be ready to put it in, which would have helped navigation through the standard. That will be coming reasonably soon, but it probably won't be ready for us in terms of publishing this guidance. So what we have done is, as a short-term issue, we have looked at how we can hyperlink both within the standard and both within the guidance and between the guidance and the standard, and we are actively working on that at present. The long-term intention is to put that, though, into the new digital handbook. So the guidance is not meant to be read from beginning to end. It is meant to be dipped in and out of. So everything we can do in the digital space will be important to help people access that information. So with that, Jim, this will be the last time I address CAG on the EER non-authoritative guidance. I thank you for your interest over the last 2 years in this guidance, and 2, for your valuable and useful input. So thank you very much, and I wish you all the best for the rest of your meeting.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you very much, and thank you for ending on time. We will take a 10-minute break, and we will return at 4:30 Eastern Standard Time. I will see everyone soon.
Thank you.
I'd like to welcome everyone back. We're going to begin in just a few seconds. Our next topic is the work plan. And Billy, I will turn it over to you or Tom for the work plan. Or Bev.
Jim.
Or all the above.
All the above. Is that right? Thank you very much. So for this session, the purpose of this session is really to just give the CAG representatives an update in terms of the developments around the framework for activities and our planned work plan consultation for 2022-2023. And this is in the context that, and you would have seen when we posted the agenda materials, there's no specific questions to the CAG, and that will become apparent as we go through the session. But obviously, we will pause to get any general comments or views after each of the two sections. So the first one we're going to look at is the framework for activities. So Michelle, you can go to the next slide. For the framework for activities, this is from a CAG perspective, it is important that we update you, but the framework for activities is not part of the IAASB due process. Obviously, the framework for activities refers to the IAASB due process where applicable, but the CAG will probably be much more interested in the topic around the work plan consultation that we're going to do in this year, which obviously is very much part of due process. So you will remember, or some of you might remember, that when we were approving our strategy for 2020 to 2023, in those documents, we introduced the notion of developing a framework for activities that provides us with a framework in terms of how we undertake our work and enhancing our internal processes and procedures. And the idea was really just to be a little bit more structured and a little bit more deliberate in terms of how we organize our activities and how we make work plan decisions. This will also, we believe, assist in providing more transparency around our work plan decisions and to give a little bit more certainty. It is important that this document, which we have finalized with the board at our February board meeting, is a living document, and we expect that it will be updated because it is very much linked to our internal processes and procedures. So as we go along and as we learn more, we will also update the document. The document was presented to the board at our February board call, and the board did reach agreement for us to adopt the framework for activities. We are just in the process at the moment of just finalizing the document based on the input we received during the February call, and we will then just clear it with our planning committee, after which it will be published on the IAASB website. So it will be there for everybody to see. And basically, the document deals with 4 components. So when we break it down, we're really saying that the standard setting related activities that we undertake consist of 4 main elements. It is about information gathering and research. It is about revising and developing standards, narrow scope maintenance of standards being the 3rd component, and then also activities we undertake to support the implementation of the IAASB standards. So at this point, I'm going to turn to Bev so that we can just at a high level take you through these 4 elements so that you're just aware on the basic structure and the intent behind the framework document. Bev?
Thank you, Billy. Michelle, next slide, please. So I'm going to start off by talking about the information gathering and research activities components. When we finalize this document, we will circulate it to the CAG just so that you can have a read of what's in there. But what Billy and I will talk about now will sort of explain broadly how we plan to go about our activities. So this component of the framework describes how we identify emerging areas that may require focus. It helps us determine what our future work activities are going to be, and then it also helps us to scope our projects. So a lot more emphasis on this area maybe than we had previously, and you would have seen this coming out a little bit in the fraud and going concern projects, where we've spent a lot more time really focused on our information gathering and research so that we can really target our standard setting activities or whatever it is that we're going to do. This is important. It is going to feed into our discussion on the work plan a little bit later. So just remember what we're talking about here and how we determine what our next topics are that come onto our work agenda. So what we do is we take topics and we put them through 3 categories. Not every topic will go through all 3 categories. We sort of have a parking lot in what we call category A topics. So the category A consists of all possible topics that could be for our consideration. So we've heard it from various sources. It could be from outreach, could be from other projects, it could be from consultations we've done, could be something happening in the environment. We continually monitor and we sort of add to these category A topics. They're kept in a big spreadsheet sort of by standard and then sort of other areas. And we continually monitoring whether anything needs to be done with these. Within these topics, there will be some that kind of, we talk about it bubbling up. So you see more and you hear more about these topics. So I think we were talking a little bit earlier about sustainability, and that's one that would be bubbling up within these category A topics. We then take them and we apply some criteria. So we obviously have lots and lots of asks for our time, our attention, and for us to do something. We can't do it all. So we have to make decisions. So what we've done is we've put criteria in place to help us make those decisions. So before a topic will move from category A to category B, we need to make sure that obviously it's in the public interest. So the overriding criteria is always it's got to be in the public interest to do something. It's got to be within the IAASB's remit. So it's got to relate to one of our standards or something that we do. It has to have prevalence globally. So even although it may be in one area or one jurisdiction or maybe 2 jurisdictions, it may only make sense for us to commit time and resources where it's a global issue. We also, the next criteria is that board action is actually needed. So, and I'll use a really simple example. So the IAASB makes a change, and that change wouldn't be consistent with something that we've got within our standards. So we would automatically need to make a change. So it has to be something where we need to do something, and then obviously the urgency of the issue, and bearing in mind that it does take us a while for us to go through our due process and set standards. So we take all of that into account. We'll put the topic through. If we believe that the topic meets what we need and we have resources and capacity at that time, it'll move to category B. So category B is where we describe what the issue and the challenge is. We do some more work. We may do roundtables. We may do a consultation. So again, fraud and going concern last year were really good examples of category B topics where we were really trying to gather information about what the issues and the challenges are. We then put all of that together, and if we see that it does warrant something, a project or some kind of initiative that we're going to do, we'll move it into category C. And it's in category C at that point in time, we establish a working group and we'll develop a project proposal for whatever that is. And again, you can see, so fraud and going concern would be sitting in category C. At this point in time. And then obviously from category C, it falls into one of the other 3. So either it's going to be standard setting, either a full standard revision or developing a new standard. It could be a narrow scope amendment, which we'll talk about in a bit, or it could be some kind of non-authoritative material, or it could be more than one of those. So it doesn't necessarily have to sort of go into only one of those. So this process is really meant to provide some of the transparency that Billy was talking about. So sort of how we make decisions on what our next topics are and where we target our efforts by going through this process. So we've gone through this process. We're now going to move on to the other 3, which Billy will just touch on to explain sort of what's sitting within the other components of the framework. So if we could have the next slide, and I'll hand back to Billy. Thank you.
Thank you, Bev. The next two components of the framework is the ones that are really familiar to us. The one on the left-hand side, revising and developing standards, that's normally what we do. That's why we are here, is to develop and and revise standards. So that's what we refer to as a full scope standard setting project, which commences as soon as there's a project proposal at the end of category C that Bev referred to. A project is now, there's an approved project proposal, and we will follow the normal due process to develop or revise the standards. We have also implemented a mechanism in terms of narrow scope maintenance of standards to create the flexibility for us to go in and do a limited number of targeted changes in relation to a standard or maybe across a few standards, where there's a clear indication using the criteria that Bev has described that there is a need for a standard setting response, but it doesn't require a full scope revision of a standard. We don't have to go and open up a standard in full. Or in instances where there may be an urgent need, a matter of urgency in terms of a targeted change to a standard, but we can't wait for a full scope project. This is then what the narrow scope maintenance for the standards will be used for. And the idea is that because these are targeted changes, very tight scoping of the project, not opening up the complete standard, they can happen much quicker. We talk in the document, which we will distribute once we finalized it, about around 12 to 18 months. But it is still a standard setting project. There still needs to be a project proposal, and it will still go through due process. Next slide, please, Michelle. And then the last component, which we've also wanted to give a little bit more structure to and transparency to in terms of what we're doing, is activities to support the implementation of the IAASB standards. And in this section, we provide for two broad categories of non-authoritative materials that we can publish. The first we refer to as first-time implementation support activities, recognizing that probably the biggest impact we can have as the IAASB is in the first 6 to 9 months after a new standard has been issued, by issuing implementation guidance, fact sheets, FAQs, videos, webinars, whatever. And that is what that first-time implementation activities are targeted at. We're currently going through that with the quality management standards as well. And then, as Bev has indicated, once a topic goes through the information gathering and research stage, we might actually identify that we don't need a standard setting response, but it's more appropriate to do non-authoritative guidance. Or out of an active project, a need can be identified for non-authoritative guidance, or through our outreach activities or our normal scanning of the environment. And the thing is, there may be a need for non-authoritative guidance on a specific topic. And again, we've put some structure around it in terms of the form of that, or the form of that non-authoritative guidance may take, how we will develop that, and also how that will be cleared by either being a fully staff-led project, or limited involvement of the board, or full involvement of the board. And that is what we've put in place in terms of the activities to support implementation. So, like we've said, we're busy, we're in the process of finalizing the document. We'll clear it with the planning committee, and then we will distribute it to the CAG, as well as it will be posted on our website as well. But maybe, Jim, let me just pause at this point before we go into the work plan to see if there's any general views or observations.
Okay, let's do that. Do we have any general views or observations? Going once? Anyone? Billy, I think I would, well, here's one. Shigeo.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. I understand that this is not part of the due process, but I just want to say that we welcome the use of framework of activities to select and sort of prioritize the work of the IAASB. And I think it's good that these initiatives will ensure transparency and clarity to the selection and prioritization of the projects. And I think these are in the public interest. We'll see. But from PIAB's point of view, we will be interested in how the aspect of resource allocation, both financial and human resource allocation, would fit into this decision-making process. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shigeo. That's all I have, Willie.
Okay, thank you, Jim, and thank you for the comments from the PIAB as well. Michelle, then I think we can go to the work plan. So as I've indicated, at the beginning, this is very much part of the process. Again, when we did our strategy for 2020 to 2023, at that stage, we also did a work plan, but the work plan covered 2020 to 2021. So we need to consult on our work plan for 2022 to 2023 as part of due process. The material that was distributed to CAG representatives for this meeting is in essence the paper that went to the board at our February board call, and there was also an indication in the appendix what the due process elements are, which obviously then involves CAG as well in terms of determining our work plan priorities. When we were looking at the approach we want, and this is really what we just want to update you on today, is the approach we were going to follow in terms of this consultation. Obviously, we will be able to come back to you in September with the results of the consultation, and that's where we will really then talk about the actual priorities in the work plan. But in terms of thinking about the approach we're going to apply, we did notice that we are going to have quite a significant number of projects that will still be ongoing at the beginning of 2022. So Michelle, if you can just maybe go to the next slide. There's just a table that we've indicated, and this is from the work plan that was published on the updated detailed work plan table that was published on February 1. And there will be significant projects ongoing, like the audit of LCE's project. There might very well be some work following out of the CUSP work stream, the complexity, understandability, scalability, and proportionality one. Audit evidence will clearly still be ongoing, as will the two key public interest projects of us in terms of fraud and going concern. And then we've also put in a work stream for implications for the IAASB standards that may flow from the IAASB project on the definitions of listed entity and PI. So we considered all of this, and also in terms of the normal progression of these projects. Again, there may be changes because of how the COVID environment is going to unfold, and the prospects of maybe returning to a more normal environment and when that might occur. And then obviously we also had to take into account current capacity of the board in terms of plenary time, especially when plenary time is limited in a virtual environment, as well as staff capacity. And then lastly, also not forgetting the capacity of our stakeholders to continue to absorb what we actually put out in the market. And we actually came to the conclusion that we've got very limited additional capacity until probably later in 2023, when there's really the first opportunity for any additional projects, one or maybe at the most two projects somewhere in 2023. So with that background, the planning committee, which acts as the task force for the strategy and the work plan, the planning committee was of the view that our strategy and our strategic actions within that strategy documents continues to remain relevant and appropriate, and that we would need to prioritize the projects that are already ongoing at the beginning of 2022. So we actually find ourselves, and Michelle, you can maybe just skip back to the previous slide. We actually find ourselves in a much similar position than we were in at the beginning, or when we were consulting on the 2017-2018 work plan, with the difference maybe that we've got now the framework for activities that provides us with a more robust mechanism in terms of making work plan decisions. At this point, I'm going to I'm going to hand over to Bev to go into a little bit more detail. Well, for one, she was here in 2017, 2018, I wasn't, but also in terms of the approach we want to follow in going out for consultation for the 2022-2023 work plan. Bev?
Thanks, Billy. So I think firstly, as we develop our work plan, part of the due process is we have to consult on it. So we've tried to think of the most effective way of consulting based on where we are at the moment. And Billy's talked a little bit about what we have on at the start of 2022 and sort of going into 2023. And as he noted, we were in the same position at the end of 2016. So as we were developing the 2017 and 18 work plan, we had really big projects on. We had the quality management project, 600, 540, 315. We had no capacity, but we still did a very sort of light touch survey to just check in with stakeholders, which still would obviously meet the due process for the development of a work plan. So we thought that that's probably a good sort of approach to adopt for the development of the work plan for 2022 and 2023. I think we've also learned that maybe we need to extend our work plan longer than 2 years, because as we have these really big projects on, it probably doesn't make sense to be consulting too often because we need to finish the projects. So what we're really trying to do is work out from our stakeholders, are you okay with us finishing what we've actually done or started, and then what comes next? So what we will do is, what we're planning to do is a short survey, again, just taking into account the amount that we put out and the fatigue of stakeholders to fill in surveys and consultations, but we will be asking 3 things. So we'll just double check that they're still happy with the strategic objectives. I think our board are fairly comfortable that they're broad enough and they're still applicable, but we'll just have a question on that. We'll ask a question on, do we finish the project we've started, or do we rethink? So should we actually be replacing what we've started? Should they take longer? Whenever we talk about projects, because they take so long, everybody wants us to shorten them. So I think it's in everyone's interest that we sort of carry on with the timelines that we have for now, and finish what we've started, and then sort of think about what next is. And then the really big question is, what's next? So Billy said capacity for 1 to 2 projects in 2023. And remember that what we're talking about and what Billy showed you is the capacity of the board to discuss and move those projects. Obviously, in the background, we could start some of them a little bit earlier because staff could start to do some of the sort of background information gathering that gets done, which is what happened last year on Fraud and Going Concern, was sort of probably for the first 6 to 8 months was largely a staff effort. It was only towards the end of the year that we started to go a little bit more public and brought in working groups. But we do need to start thinking at some point soonish about what the next topics will be. So now back to the conversation we had earlier about the category A topics. And I think the category A topics, we have probably highlighted maybe 8 to 10 topics that if we put them through the criteria, and we still need to do the exercise, that are probably have bubbled up. And what we will do is we'll present those in the survey and ask stakeholders to rank them. So again, that will help inform us as to where people think we need to do work. We will also ask a question if there's something else that's not on that list that they think sort of should be more of a priority. So ordinarily when we do our consultations on the work plan, we often just ask open questions. What do you think the next project should be? Tell us what you think. I think this one, we're going to give the projects that we see, we will ask an open question about whether there's anything else. So just really a more of a sort of, for us, a light touch sort of survey and consultation. I think we did distribute the paper that we had distributed to the board. It has a time or the timing of this. So we expect the survey to go out April time, end of April. We'll get it back end of July. We'll do some work to sort of put the responses together, see if we still carry on with what we've got and sort of what we think the next projects will be. So we'll develop the work plan or the draft work plan for 2022 and 23, which we'll bring to you for discussion together with the input from the consultation. Obviously, as we do our outreach from now until then, we'll also be talking to all of our stakeholders about what our next project should be as well. So, so it's not just the consultation, we obviously get put through other ways as well. So with that, Jim, I think that sort of explains our approach and what we're intending to do. So if anybody has any comments or questions about that, Jim, I'll hand back to you to open up to the CAG representatives. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Beverly. And there is, I mean, it really does prescribe a process. Maybe that's a new process. There may be some questions from some of the CAG members on that process, but let me go to the CAG to see if we have any particular comments on the work plan. Bev, it doesn't look like we have any particular comments on the work.
There's a hand now, Jim.
Oh, thank you. Wei?
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Thanks for the overview on developing the 2020 to 2022 work plan. I agree with the approach taken. There are priority projects needed to be completed in the near term, including those topics such as ISA 600, fraud, going concern, and audit evidence that are important to the global capital market. I appreciate the work has been done by the planning committee in developing the work plan. That's all. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Wei. Hilda.
Yes, thank you. Very quickly, I think the comments that we plan to make have already been made in the previous section on assurance on non-financial information, or as you call it, EER. I think there is a wider question about, looking at assurance and, not only audit of financial statements, which obviously it continues to be very important. Over the last year or so within Accountants Europe, we have focused, for instance, much more on actually what are the impacts of digital reporting for assurance, and we actually had to do work on that because of this SF, which is basically reporting based on taxonomies. And what is now emerging is something which we see bubbling up all over the world. It's what is in the area of what we call tax assurance, and it's a cooperative compliance whereby actually companies do give more description on how they actually plan and describe what they do related to taxation. That's very much also, I would say, a ESG matter. And for that, there is more of a cooperative working relationship with the tax authorities, but often on the condition that there is tax assurance on some or all of the descriptions that they give publicly. These are really emerging matters that we see coming, and I just wanted to make you aware of those, that this is very much what we see emerging, and maybe very soon it will hit your radar screen as well. And then one particular specific comment, and it is on what in the IAASB CAG tomorrow we will discuss, and it is this definition of listed entities and the PIEs, and really a plea to make sure we end up with the same definition in what the IAASB code is and what the ISAs and the ISAEs are. So hopefully there is a possibility to rely on the work that is done by the other board for that, because it would be a pity if it would not be the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilda. Tom?
Thank you. It's actually a plea to all the members of this council, this advisory group, that your role in helping us gather input on our consultation. And I see our PIOB's observer hand up, but we're constantly reminded to seek a broad diversity of input. We're trying to structure this consultation in such a way that will invite input for people who aren't normally accustomed to write in long treatises or comment letters. So I hope that will lower the barriers for entry. But I would ask you in your interaction, both within your organizations, but ones you know who are connected to the state, those to please participate, because we are seeking a real diversity of views. And one of the things we get challenged on repeatedly is whether we get that diversity of stakeholder input that reflects the public interest in our standard setting process. So I ask you, we'll obviously publicize this quite a bit. I ask your organizations to all participate, but any other organizations that you're involved with, have connection to, you could help encourage them to participate and help publicize through our social media accounts, or LinkedIn, Twitter, etc., so more people know that we are seeking input at the appropriate time. Because even if the project is not on our list for today, it will go into the pipeline for tomorrow.
Thanks, Tom. And I think that's some good advice, and particularly for people to go back to their organizations so we can get more input in terms of the work plan on a go-forward basis. It looks like Shigeo, do you have another question or comment?
Well, yeah, thank you. I just wanted to repeat the comments I made a couple of minutes ago about the framework of the activities. It's very good and useful to have this kind of initiative to sort of have transparency and clarity in selecting and prioritizing the projects. And I really strongly support what Tom has just said, and agree with him that it's very important for the important to encourage the stakeholders other than the profession to express their views of the priority or the selection of what the IWSP should be doing. And PIOB has its own view based on public interest perspective about the selection or the prioritization, but I really encourage other people to speak up as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Takashi.
Thank you, Jim. I'm sorry, I want to back to the first topic on the framework for activities.
Okay.
I have just one observation. My understanding is that this framework for activities, the draft of framework for activities was included in the last strategy and work plan and consultation, maybe 2019. And when IWSP consulted the work strategy in 2024 and the work plan for 2022 and 2021, the consultation paper was included for the draft or direction of the framework for the activities. In that sense, I think to get more transparency for the IWSP activities, and when the next time when IWSP consider to revise this framework itself, I think it is more transparency and more useful for the various stakeholders to the chance to have a comment on that framework itself. And so I want to encourage IWSP to take it consideration for the next time when you revise this framework. This framework for activities should be a consultation for the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Takashi. I do not see any more hands. Bev, I have a question to you. And this is what Tom mentioned. Is there a best time to provide feedback? Is this work plan is always changing?
So I think, Jim, in the first instance, and I'll ask Bev to just respond now. We did set out a timeline there. So I think you know, if the representatives from this group can go back to their organizations and they can make sure that they at least respond to the survey that we're going to put out at the end of April, that will be That will be the first ask. And then obviously we'll bring those results back to the CAG at the September meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe, Jim, while I have the floor, and before I ask Bev if she wants to come in on anything, I just want to respond to the 2 points that Hilda also raised. The one is around the assurance of non-financial information. And we had a discussion under the EER topic. That is certainly one of the topics that will be included in the survey, because obviously it has, like Bev likes to describe, it has bubbled up through those criteria, and we will include that in that list of topics that we will present to board members, to the stakeholders. Although we will ask our stakeholders to rank the topics, in terms of our normal practice, we don't just count responses. So I think we will also ask, or stakeholders will also have an opportunity on top of indicating the ranking, also providing, if they want, the rationale behind their ranking. So I think from that, we will also get good qualitative input in terms of trying to apply the criteria then to what we've heard on the consultation. And then Hilda, just maybe in terms of the PI project, we have been coordinating very closely with the ethics board throughout the PI project. We also have 2 of our board members are correspondent members of the PI task force. And in the explanatory memorandum for the ED that is currently out on public consultation, there's also a specific question that we've included from an IAASB perspective to also get feedback from stakeholders in terms of how the proposals around the definitions of listed entity and PI may have implications for the IAASB standards. And we've also, when the ED was released, we put out a news release to also encourage our stakeholders to respond to that exposure draft. So we will certainly stay very close to the PI project as well, and that's why we also included a work stream for that on the current work plan. Bev, I think that covers everything I heard. I just want to give you an opportunity for anything else.
Nothing further, thank you.
Okay. So Jim, I think then if there's nothing else, that concludes this section of the agenda.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Vili. Thank you, Bev and Tom. Very well. Our next session will be the private session. And so we're going to give everyone a few minutes because there's some changes in terms of who's coming in and going out of the rooms, and then we'll start the private session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Just a few announcements. So the private session is only for the IAASB CAG representatives and the official observers. So Michelle will remove the IAASB members and the IAASB staff, which we will return after the meeting. So she will transfer you to a waiting room. If this is the end of your meeting, you are not one of the above, you may just leave the meeting. If we remove you